Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarita Dua. I'm an EMBA 2020, and I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Bethany Patton. Bethany Patton is the executive director of MIT's new Climate Policy Center and is a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan. Her work centers on the translation of academic research into real-world impact in the public and private sector. Specifically, she examines how institutions can best practice ethical political engagement, connecting with and educating leaders ranging from MIT graduate students to members of the United States Congress. Bethany is known at MIT for advancing the Institute's climate policy research among leaders in government, business, and civil society. Beyond MIT, she's recognized for her climate leadership in Massachusetts as a board member and treasurer for the Environmental League of Massachusetts and the Climate Beacon Project. She holds an EMBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management, an MPA at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and a BA from Boston College. Bethany joins us today to provide an interactive demonstration on En-ROADS and explore the impact that dozens of policies have on hundreds of factors like energy prices, temperature, air quality, and sea level rise. And for some very late-breaking news, I'm delighted to share that En-ROADS has been selected as the winner in the education category of the Digital with Purpose DWP Awards. Its winning submission stood out among an exceptionally strong field of global submissions for its innovation, impact, and alignment with the values of purposeful digital transformation. Now, please join me in welcoming Bethany Patton.
Thanks, Sarita, and it's really great to be here today and to see some familiar faces and also a whole bunch of new faces. I'm going to do a little bit of a commercial on MIT's climate work, and then I'm going to get into the real reason that we're all here today, which is to do a workshop using the En-ROADS model. So for the commercial portion, I'm going to start with just what's been going on campus with climate in the last couple of years. Are people aware of MIT's kind of accelerated approach to climate over the last year or so? Just raise your hand if you've heard about it. Okay, great. So my commercial is going to work because there's a whole bunch of people who don't know what's going on. So the history of climate action at MIT is not something that just started when President Corn Booth took her position. It has actually been going on for a couple of decades now with a bunch of reports that have looked at both, what is the research going on, how can we make our campus more sustainable, and ultimately leading to the report that came out in 2021 called the Fast Forward Climate Action Plan for the next decade. And this was really the roadmap to be thinking about, okay, if we're really going to be thinking about climate, what are we going to be thinking about, and what are our objectives going to be? So we need to go as far as we can and as fast as we can with the tools and methods that we have now, and invent and invest in the future and develop new tools while educating and empowering the next generation. And this tension between going as far as we can and as fast as we can with what we've got now and inventing the future really plays into the idea that we know that we are inventing the future at MIT, and we also need to be thinking about what we can do right now, especially with a problem as urgent as climate. So that was a new addition to the thinking and the culture around the school and laid the groundwork for some of the work that I'm going to be talking to you about for the rest of the presentation. So Sally came and she said in her inaugural address, we need to make a bold, tenacious response to climate, mount a bold, tenacious response to climate change. It's the greatest scientific and societal challenge of this or any age. So she really put the stake in the ground and said, I'm going to do something about this. And climate became one of her and is now one of her strategic initiatives here at the Institute. She put her money where her mouth was with a $50 million investment in what we're calling the Climate Project at MIT. And this is the goal is for MIT to become, within the next decade, and that time bound that time binding is very important, one of the world's most prolific and collaborative sources of technological, behavioral, and policy solutions for the global climate challenge. This policy part is one that I particularly care about because all of this technology really does need a boost, policy, both public policy as well as policies within our organizations. So it's a whole of MIT approach. It's delivering and scaling up solutions that can be implemented as quickly as possible. So this is that decade thing again. And we will have succeeded if after 10 years, MIT's work has changed the global climate outcome for the better. When I designed these slides, we hadn't started talking about the new VP of Climate, but we're now very happy to say that we have a VP of Climate and Energy, Evelyn Wang. She was formerly at ARPA-E, but she's a longtime faculty member of MIT, and so she's now leading the climate project with a team of about 10 or 12 staff right now, and a whole bunch of faculty who are working on the problem as well. So what does the climate project look like? Well, so what we've done is we've said, okay, what are the critical gaps and bottlenecks that are constraining progress? And where does MIT have expertise where they can lend to the conversation in meaningful ways? So we have identified 6 pillars, 6 missions, we're calling them, which all are speaking to at this intersection of expertise and what we think are the critical problems that we need to face as, with the global climate challenge. So decarbonizing energy and industry is one of them, and that's led by Elsa Olivetti. Restoring the atmosphere and protecting lands and oceans, and that's led by Andrew Babin and Jesse Kroll. Empowering frontline communities is led by Miho Mazzarino. Christoph Reinhardt is leading the Building and Adapting Healthy and Resilient Cities. And Benedetto Morelli is leading what we're calling the wild cards, and I'm going to talk about policy approaches in a second, but wild cards are really anything that might come up that all of you might say, hey, have you ever thought about, or we hadn't considered, but it gives us the opportunity to have at least one bucket where we can just be really wild and crazy. So the Inventing New Policy Approaches is led by Chris Knittel, who is the faculty director also of the Climate Policy Center, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. And the goal there is to really think about how can we really invent new approaches to climate policy. So the question that we ask in that pillar is, what is the biggest thing that's getting in the way of us progressing climate policy today? And I actually urge you all to think about that, both today and in the future, and let us know. Because one of the things that is different about the climate project is that we don't want to be just insular to MIT. We want to make sure that we are engaging all stakeholders, anyone who has an opinion, so that what we're doing is we're coming up with ideas that are different than what we've already come up with, and that we're getting feedback from our community, both our direct community and then our partners, to try and come up with solutions. So question, what is the biggest thing that's getting in the way of climate policy today? And what we really mean by that is, is it that is our vested interests just so entrenched that we're never going to be able to come up with an argument that's more palatable than what these vested interests are? Or do we just not have the global structures? Like, is the UNFCCC process fundamentally broken? And do we need to think about a whole new way of a whole new global governance structure? These are the big, high-level questions that we're seeking to ask. And of course, we'll then scope down to projects that are a little bit more manageable in a shorter amount of time. But this is the way that we're thinking. Okay, so that's the climate project. Along with the climate project and seeing this investment the school was making, Dean Schmidtlein said, I really care about how MIT can progress climate policy. So what I would like to see is us have a new MIT Climate Policy Center, and we're going to have it here at MIT Sloan. So last year, he endowed the Climate Policy Center, and this is the center that I now run with Chris. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Mostly I'm going to talk about what is the problem the Climate Policy Center is trying to solve. And I use that language because that's my favorite framing is Nelson Repenning's framing of what is the problem we're trying to solve. If anybody's ever had a class with him, that's kind of how I live my life. So what is the problem that the Climate Policy Center is trying to solve? Well, the current state is that we've got a whole bunch of research at MIT that is climate policy relevant. We've got centers. We've got initiatives, we've got student initiatives, we've got conferences, and none of them are really working together, so it's been this 1,000 flowers bloomed kind of situation, where we see this person over here doing really interesting work in climate policy, and somebody over here who's doing something pretty similar but slightly different and just not coordinating. And where I really saw this most prevalent is in planning for the COP negotiations, where I went to Dubai, and all of a sudden there were 10 or 12 people from MIT there doing presentations that I had never met and didn't even know. So which is like part of the culture here, right? And it's what makes us so interesting and unique. And if we're really going to do something here, we need to be more coordinated. So more coordinated on all fronts, especially around how we present ourselves to the policy community, because the one thing you don't want is to go into a congressional office and have somebody say, somebody from MIT was just here yesterday talking about this, because it makes it look like you just don't know what you're doing. And for people whose biggest commodity that they trade in is time, this is kind of it's a major faux pas. So the other thing that's going on is that climate policy relevant research is happening here, but people in DC and the policy community don't know it. They don't know that we're doing it, right? So we've got all of this really interesting work that's just sitting on the shelves without being implemented or being advised, and no real strategy to actually do that engagement. We do have a Washington office, and a lot of respect for that office, especially right now, but they're covering every single thing that, every issue that is imaginable, right? Healthcare, manufacturing, all of these things, and so climate is just one of the many things that they're thinking about. So, and this is not just about federal policy. We do think definitely at the international level and the subnational level, but I use Washington as an example because it's just the easiest to understand. So people didn't know what we were up to, they didn't know what we were doing, and the root cause is that there was just so much focus on research, but not enough focus on translation, outreach, and communication. So typical life cycle of academic work is you publish papers, you write an op-ed, you hope somebody reads it and implements it or puts it into their legislation, but that actually never happens. Because what turns out is that the most important piece of information that's in a published work is on page 31, figure 9. And if you ever met a staffer, they barely get past the first page, right? Let alone to that figure 9 on page 31. So that's our job, right? Our job is to point them to that figure and give them the most easy way for them to learn about that work. So our desired state is that there is a huge ecosystem of people that are, and this is purposely confusing this slide. To show that the selling of an idea, a policy idea, involves, agencies within the government. It involves the media. It involves think tanks. It involves corporations and business interests and trade associations. And all of these people are different depending on your issue, right? So this is just the renewable energy map, and this was probably drawn 5 or 6 years ago, so it's probably different now. If we have 10 different issues that we're trying to promote, we've got 10 different maps. Those are hundreds of different relationships, right? So that takes a ton of work and a ton of relationship building, and just wasn't a capacity that MIT was investing in. So we're really psyched to be doing this right now with our small and nimble team. How do we fit within the climate project, just to kind of bring it all together, and then I'll be done with my commercial, is that we are both thinking about, Chris and I are both thinking about inventing new policy approaches in the climate project, so specifically around those big ideas, and we are helping all of the missions implement policy ideas within their own missions. So Elsa Olvetti right now is working on critical minerals. We're trying to help her think about what are the agencies and departments she should be talking to, what are the policy implications of any kind of new research that might emerge out of the work that she's doing. And then we also are supporting all of the other centers and initiatives across campus who are doing work on climate policy. So that is that's kind of the overview of why we're doing the work. Just very quickly on our mission, vision, and strategy. So our mission and vision is to serve as a trusted, nonpartisan research for policymakers who wish to advance climate policy in the next decade. So we take that next decade language and also really layer on this and are very serious about being nonpartisan and trusted. And the way that that shows up is when we have a particular kind of research, the first thing we ask is, the first thing that we make sure is that when we talk to a faculty member, their intention is not to push a policy agenda, but that their intention is just to inform policymakers. A great example of this is Professor Tom Peacock recently gave some testimony around the dust clouds that form when you start to do deep sea mining for critical minerals in the ocean floor. And so, he was invited by both Republicans and Democrats to give his testimony because of the fact that he was just there for scientific advice as opposed to some kind of policy agenda or political agenda. So we want to be MIT's front door for policymakers, so we're coordinating and enhancing the activities, amplify the efforts of the Climate Project missions, as well as all of those other centers and initiatives across campus, and be a two-way street, deepening the relationships between MIT and relevant policymakers. So if you are engaged in policy at all, in anywhere that you are, please let us know, because as I said, there's hundreds of relationships that we need to develop, and having an alumni make that introduction is incredibly valuable to us. So that's one big ask that we have, is the more relationships that we can build out of this community, the better. So how are we doing this? So we have 3 pillars to our mission. One is convening, informing, and recommending. So this means workshops, gathering stakeholders, getting consensus, coming up with new ideas. Analyzing and translating climate policy proposals. So we recently did a whole bunch of work, and you can find this on our website, on transmission, energy, electricity transmission, and what does it look like to expand transmission given the increasing demand for energy and AI and all of those kinds of things. And then heighten awareness of MIT expertise and tools. So usually I say heighten awareness first because that's the trajectory of how we develop this. But I'm doing it last because this is what we're going to be mainly focusing on today. So one of the most valuable tools that we have had in the last 5 or 10 years in heightening the awareness of MIT expertise in the climate policy space is En-ROADS. How many people have heard of the En-ROADS Climate Policy Simulator? All right, this is great. How many people have used it in the last couple of years? Okay, good. So there are so many cool new enhancements. We update it about every month, every 2 months, with new graphs, latest available science. And so hopefully, even for the people who have used it recently, this will be kind of a new experience. Okay, and so when we talk about heightening awareness of MIT and expertise and tools, we all think about John Sterman and John's work, and this is really his life's work. Even when he goes on sabbatical in September, he said, the only thing I'm going to be focusing on is En-ROADS. So he's very, very committed to this. And in the last 5 years, we have been packaging his workshops to particularly focus on engagement with leaders in government, business, and civil society. So we have met with, these numbers are as of November, but as of today, it's closer to 20,000 leaders in the last 5 years, including members of Congress, governors, heads of state in other parts of the world, leaders in academia, leaders in finance. We have a particular focus on finance using En-ROADS to engage the finance community. Jason Jay does that work. And NGOs and the whole policy ecosystem. So this is what what we've done is we've said, okay, we've got this tool that can communicate about climate policy, and we're going to get it out in the world, as particularly with leaders. So our theory of change is get the tool in the hands of the leaders, and see change happen from there. So this is what we're going to do today. We are actually going to do an En-ROADS workshop. And so that means that you all are going to raise your hands and shout out things and engage in the process. And what I will say is I see that we've got a whole bunch of people here, including people who are probably still in school and people who have been out of school for a really long time. The model and the workshop that we do here today is the same no matter who we speak to. So whether we're speaking to the president or a governor, we're doing the exact same workshop that we do in the classroom in high schools and elementary schools. So with that, I'm just going to talk to you just for a second about En-ROADS. So En-ROADS is the model is developed with the nonprofit think tank Climate Interactive, who consider themselves a climate tech company. Drew Jones, who is the executive director of Climate Interactive, was a TPP student. He saw John's work and he said, this is going to sit on a shelf forever if you don't turn it into something that's useful. And so he built the En-ROADS model by spinning off and having this nonprofit, Climate Interactive. We here at MIT Sloan support his work, both financially, but also John is a scientific advisor. And the model is based on a whole bunch of other kinds of models and a whole bunch of tons and tons and tons of excuse me, inputs from IEA, IPCC, EIA, and lots of other sources. So it's based on the best available science. Some features of the model are that it's accessible, meaning that you all can go to your browser or your tablet, and you can find it right now at enroads.org. It's transparent, so all of the equations are available for anyone to see. And this is especially important because when we're talking, because we want to be this trusted nonpartisan source, we often get into these conversations about what are your underlying assumptions, and those are available for anyone to see, and you can change them. So that lowers the barrier to conversations a lot with people who think that we're just trying to push a particular agenda. We can say, change the agenda. It's tested and calibrated against some of the biggest integrated assessment models. Flexible, so like I said, the equations are visible, but also all of the assumptions are changeable. It runs on your laptop in a second, so you move a slider and you can see the output of it. A lot of these bigger models that we have here at MIT and in other places are, it takes like a week to run some of those equations. So this runs in an instant. And it's about grounding, so it's about creating a conversation that you then might test more robustly with another model in the future. But if you need to make a decision about something right now in a short amount of time, En-ROADS is a great tool to do that. And in fact, ROADS is rapid overview and decision support. So it's a decision support tool. And it's one of the few, we're going to be building out a whole bunch of decision support tools through the Climate Policy Center that help with lots of different kinds of topics. Like, we have a student who's working on something. If you're a startup and you want to think about what the policy environment looks like and how the policy environment might be able to enable your startup or might get in the way, your kind of climate tech startup, she has a decision support tool for that. So, okay, so those are the characteristics of the model. It's a global model. So one of the big questions we often get is, this is really cool, can you tell me how this is going to happen in my state? The answer is no. But what we can do is we can say, tell us about your concerns in your state, and we can extrapolate from what we're seeing in the global model, but it is a global model. 450,000 people around the world have used it, 850 trained ambassadors who can facilitate workshops like what we're going to do today, and translated into 20 languages. So it really is, our goal is to get 1 million people seeing it, so we're about halfway there, and really truly is something that, globally people recognize. In terms of our reach, I already talked about this. We've had endorsements from both sides of the aisle. John Curtis, who was a representative when he gave this quote, but is now a senator for Utah, said what he likes about En-ROADS is how it can support a really thoughtful conversation. So that was a really great endorsement. And then John Kerry, of course, said it's quite simply a climate crisis game changer. And we've got a whole bunch of different endorsements and folks from around the world who have talked about it and who really enjoy it. All right, why is it important? Well, climate change is costly, and it's only getting more expensive, right? 376 separate weather events and climate disasters cost about $2.6 trillion since 1980, and we're only going to see that rise. So the cost is going up, and we know this. We're seeing it in insurance costs and all sorts of other kinds of costs. And emissions are continuing to rise, so it's only going to get more costly as emissions go up and temperature goes up. But we need to reduce that as quick as possible. So we've got to take emissions at almost 60 gigatons in 2019 and get them down to almost zero by 2050. That's a huge job, right? And it's a very short amount of time. We're now, 2025, right? So we're 25 years away from goals that are supposed to get us to net zero. The other issue that we face is that we have a trajectory of business as usual that gets us to 3.3 degrees Celsius, or 6 degrees Fahrenheit. With the Paris Accord commitments, that only gets us to 2.9. But where we need to be is at 2 degrees striving for 1.5. So that's a huge gap to fill, right? And the way that we fill that is through more aggressive policies, behavior change, and new technology development. So how do we cut emissions as quickly as possible, right? So everybody, if you ask anyone, they're all going to have a different idea. Ban coal, energy efficiency in buildings. We need a price on carbon. What if I eat less meat? regulation, new technology, right? Everybody has a different answer or silver bullet for what they think is going to be the answer for getting emissions down as quickly as possible. And if we had time, we could run all these experiments. Like, well, let's just try a carbon price for right now over here, and we'll do a randomized control trial. But we don't have time, right? And we don't have that ability. And so that's what models like En-ROADS can do, right? They can help us figure out and experiment and learn for ourselves what are the highest and low leverage policies. All right, just to quickly explain how the model works so that you get the dynamics of it. It's basically it's a system dynamics model that's based on this bathtub dynamics. So we've got emissions going into the atmosphere from natural sources and human-made sources. They're filling up the atmosphere with CO2 and other greenhouse gases. And then we have ways to pull CO2 and other greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, right? And some of them are natural and some of them are technological. What we need to do is we need to both reduce the rate that we are getting emissions into the atmosphere and increase the rate that we are sucking them out. So we don't want to see that bathtub fill up. We want to see that bathtub, be reduced. So that's how the model works. So it basically is just a bathtub dynamic. We're just two different faucets. All right, so why simulation, and why do I not just stand in front of you and tell you all the answers? And I can guarantee you that every meeting that we go into, somebody says, hey, this is really cool, we're pulling a couple levers, but why don't you tell us what the answer is? And we are rigorously opposed to telling people what the answer is, because what John likes to say is research shows, showing people research doesn't work. You have to get in, you have to move levers, you have to show people and learn for yourselves, because otherwise, the learning just doesn't happen. And this is why, in general, faculty and researchers do have a hard time talking to policymakers, because they're just going in and talking at them. They're not helping them learn for themselves. So you all are going to learn for yourself. So I'm just going to end my slideshow here and get us right into the model. So this is the model. This is actually happening in real time, right? So if we were to move a lever, we can see things changing in real time. I'm going to give you a quick tour. So what we've got is we've got a model of the energy system and how we use the energy, and then the way that we pull it out. So over here is what is anything, the energy supply that is going to either put emissions into the atmosphere or not, if it's a renewable or a carbon price, but this is all the stuff that has to do with putting emissions in. In the middle is how we use it, and then on the left is removals. So this is anything that we do to take carbon out, or GHGs out of the atmosphere. Things like what you can do is you can heavily tax coal. So everything is about encouraging and discouraging on the levers. You can tax coal, you can subsidize renewables, you can put a price on carbon, so that's kind of how this works. In the middle, you can do things like make our transportation system more energy efficient or electrify it. You can make our buildings and industry more energy efficient or electrify them. We could talk a little bit about population and economic growth. I'll show you how that works in a second. And then over here on the right is everything having to do with removals. So nature-based removals like planting trees, or technological removals like carbon capture and sequestration. Agricultural, anything having to do with agricultural emissions and could we actually store more carbon in the earth. Anything having to do with waste and leakage, and then deforestation. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of graphs. We have 12 graphs that we care about the most, which I'm not going to make you memorize. But the two graphs that are most important for a short amount of time like we have here today is both the inputs into it and into the system, into the bathtub, and then the emissions that they create. So this is the bathtub. The graph on the right is the bathtub, right? So what we know is we've got out into 2100, the brown line on the bottom on this left graph is coal. This is what we're expecting for demand on coal, or global sources of primary energy. This is what we're expecting to use out to 2100. Red is oil, blue is gas, that's natural gas, Renewables is the green wedge, bioenergy is the pink wedge, and the little sliver on the top is nuclear. On the right side is the emissions that come from all of that, right? So we've got land use CO2 is the green, then that big gray band, that's most of it, that's the fossil fuel CO2. On the top are the other greenhouse gases like F gases, fluorinated gases from your refrigerators. CH4, that's methane, that comes from both production of fossil fuel, but other kinds of waste emits methane. And then N2O, nitrous oxide at the top. So that is what the greenhouse gas inventory right now looks like on the right, and so that is the interplay. I'm not going to take. Do you have a question?
Clarification. The two numbers top right.
Yeah.
Why are there two different numbers, and what's the difference?
Okay, so that's temperature. Which are you talking about? Temperature.
3.3.
Yeah, it's temperature. That's temperature. So this is. So then this is.
C and F.
Yep. So what we've got coming out so basically what we're seeing is as a result of the energy that we're going to be using out into 2100 and the emissions that it creates, we are seeing temperature going up to 3.3 by 2100 or 5.9 Fahrenheit. What we need to do is we need to bend that curve to go, instead of going up to 3.3, we want it to be going down towards 1.5. And that's the job that you guys have today. So that's quickly just a little bit of a tour of the model. But one question I wanted to ask is, we used to just think about this in terms of emissions reduction and temperature reduction, but that's not the only thing that people care about when they think about climate. So what are some of the other things that you all, and this is the portion where you're going to start talking. So what are some of the things that you all think about when you think about the impacts of climate change or that you worry about?
Biodiversity loss.
Okay, great. Yes?
I worry about that the places like where it maybe is hot, it can change the weather. People have to get used to different weather.
Yes, it's getting so much hotter, and people are going to be, it's going to affect people and their lives. Awesome. Yeah?
What she said.
Heat. Cost.
I think a lot about the cost.
The cost of us being able to pay for that cost, or just?
Implementing it and also personal cost.
Okay, great. Yes?
I think about incentives to create awareness and changes in behavior. For example, I was really intrigued by a Canadian utility that did hot water as a service to motivate people and to gain control of shifting energy for hot water to nighttime and producing a difference in investing in equipment. So people respond to pricing in ways that we still haven't integrated into.
So a little bit of the same sort of how do we think about the cost of this? Yeah, a couple more.
Sea level rise.
Sea level rise, yeah, it's huge. Yeah, in the back there.
Water, mega drought, and disasters, historic flood.
Water, drought, floods, yep.
Ocean acidification.
Ocean acidification, great. I feel like some of you have seen this model before because you know that we have these graphs. One more in the back.
Mass migration.
Mass migration, yes. Like security issues, all sorts of things. Yes, okay. So I'm going to stop there because we've only got a little bit of time, but I'm just going to show you that we have, over the last couple of years, designed and developed graphs, impact graphs, that look at everything from extreme weather conditions, heat days, and in this case, we've integrated maps with an organization called Probable Futures. How many days of more humidity, frequency of extreme heat, deaths from extreme heat, exposure to more storms, hurricanes, typhoons, air pollution, there's crop yield loss, biodiversity loss, sea level rise, drought. So what we've done is we've started to realize that people care about more than just the fact that the temperature is increasing. They care about how this is going to affect their daily lives. To the one on cost, and I think this is a good place to kind of start here. is that when we think about the cost of climate change, what we think about is what is the expected GDP, global GDP going out to 2100, and that is the dotted line that you see at the top. And then what is the expected GDP as a result of climate, right? So that you would see that GDP go down because it's so costly, right? And so there is this think about your mental model of what happens when we start to implement some of these policies that we're going to be talking about today. Are they going to have that cost go up? Are they going to have that cost go down? What's going to happen to those costs? So I've done enough of showing around. We can stop with the show and tell, and we can get right into it. And so what I'm going to ask is, what if you could try any policy what would you try? What do you guys want to try? Any suggestions? Whoa, all right, hands. We're gonna have to do hands. Go ahead.
Take the California solar and battery subsidies and make them national
So battery,
on the renewable side.
just battery subsidies. We can't break out batteries, but we'll talk about renewables. So you wanna subsidize renewables. What do you think is gonna happen? We're at 3.3 degrees right here. If we heavily subsidize renewables, what do you think is gonna happen to temperature? Guess. Is it going to go down? Are we going to go from 3.3 degrees C? Is it okay if I talk in Celsius?
Yeah.
Okay. 3.3 degrees C to 2.3 or 3.3 to 3.2? What do you think?
I think that in isolation would have a minor effect, but the thing is that it would be a replacement for coal and oil.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to subsidize renewables, and the guess is that temperature might go down a little bit, but it may crowd out or substitute some of these other fossil fuels here. So the way that we look at this is we look at what is happening over here in this graph, but then we also look at what's happening with the temperature. And just because I'm also teaching you how to use this tool a little bit, I'll show you that underneath each of these sliders, you can press these 3 dots. There's a whole bunch of other things, more specific things that you can do, but we don't have that much time, so I'm just going to go pretty general, and I'm going to say we're going to heavily subsidize renewables. Watch the graphs at the top and see what happens. Okay. So we go from 3.3, and the room gets quiet. We go from 3.3 to 3.2. We do see that the renewable wedge, the green wedge goes up. I'm replaying it up here by hitting this button. We see the renewable wedge opens up a little bit, and it pushes down those others. We see a little bit of a reduction in CO2, not that much, but it's something, right? So it gets us a little bit there. It gets us a little bit. Great. Next. Yes, right here.
Nature-based removal.
Yes, so what, do you have a particular nature-based solution that you like?
Reforestation, especially in marine areas like sea kelp, mangroves, that sort of thing.
Okay, so you want to plant more trees. Okay, so you want to do it all, right? So, which is great. This is great. But we could look at and isolate just afforestation or other ways, kind of to think about that. So let's kind of mid-range. And so, what do you think is going to happen? Because what happens when we plant more trees? What are they doing? Absorbing more CO2, yeah.
So by 2100, depending on the area, of course, and many other factors, I think it will decrease to probably below 3.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of a demonstration here. So just this graph down the bottom here, this is the land, because when we're talking about planting trees, and a lot of the conversation that we have when we're talking about anything that's CO2 removal or nature-based is that it's a trade-off with land use, right? And so the big question is, where do we get the land? Who owns the land? What else would we be using the land for? Growing food for a growing population. So these are some of the questions. So let's look at just the land mass of India. I'm gonna plant a ton of trees. There's 1 trillion trees, right? See what happens? Okay, so here we go. So we go to 3.1. Now I'm going to replay it, and we're going to talk through a couple of things. So one is, we're definitely seeing that the land use CO2 is going down, right? We're probably, if we really dig in, we'll start to see some removals. Temperature went down 0.2. We are really using a ton of land, right? But what else is happening? Do you see kind of when this is, actually, let me show you another graph. I'm going to show you the emissions. graph. When are you seeing the effect?
Like 15 years from now.
Why? 15 years from now, yeah, why?
Because the trees have to grow.
Because it takes a long time for trees to grow. So we love trees. We definitely want to see trees. It takes a ton of land, and it takes a long time to grow. So one of these are, again, some of these trade-offs that happen with the policies, right? Yeah, no, it's a great, like, yeah. Okay, other voices. Gay. Build more nuclear. Okay, so this seems to be a very popular policy in the U.S. right now. So right now this is the nuclear, this little blue wedge.
And that's both types?
That I mean,
Fission and fusion?
it is. Fission. It's only fission. Yeah, it's what we know about technology now. Yeah. So it's a blue line, and it's going out. It's sort of staying the same all the way. Okay, Gay, what do you think is going to happen?
I think you'll have a more meaningful decrease in your temperature.
More meaningful decrease. Okay, I'm gonna give it a big boost because this seems to be the only thing that is being supported right now on both sides of the aisle. And I say that not with any judgment. It just seems to be what's politically palatable right now. Okay. So we see a couple of things happen. We see the blue wedge go up a little bit. Temperature really doesn't do anything. Emissions go down a little bit. Demand goes up. We see definitely there's more demand for it, especially out into the out years. Nuclear plants also take a ton of time to build and are often very costly. But what else is happening? When you're looking at the graph on the left, or this graph on the left, what are you seeing happening to the other fuel sources?
Compensating renewables.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's crowding out renewables, right? So we're basically saying we've got this technology that we know and we can deploy very quickly, that is very cheap, is being crowded out by this other technology that takes a really long time and actually doesn't do that much. Now, relative to what we did with renewables, it actually is kind of, it's sort of similar. It's like probably, I would have to go into the details on it, but it's sort of similar, but it definitely is crowding out this renewables, meaning that it's not, were you surprised by that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Crank up the price of carbon.
Crank up the price of carbon. And what happens when we price carbon?
I have some carbon in my basement. I could probably make money on it.
You've got gold bars and carbon. All right, great.
Address the common good challenge.
You address the common good challenge, right? Yeah, exactly. So we can put a price, we can do all sorts of things with carbon pricing in this model. We can, we can set a price, we can phase it in over a certain amount of time. But for right now, what I'm just gonna say, do you have a price that you're thinking about? Okay, so actually, why don't we do just a 30 seconds on carbon price. So carbon price is a word that everybody hears, and I think a lot of the time people don't really understand what it is or have some vague understanding of what it is. So we talked about the price of climate change, right? That like with all of these storms and these extreme storms, we're seeing the cost $2.6 trillion, right? And basically that is a way of figuring out what is the cost of carbon. And it can also be called the social cost of carbon. Like how much money do we have to spend in order to clean up the mess that climate change has caused? And you can look at this at a global level, you can look at this at a company level, you can say, what is my cost to pollute? Right now your cost to pollute is pretty much zero, which is why we're polluting so much. Or we can say, I think we're gonna put a price on carbon, and if I put a price on carbon, I have to pay for that. Is it cheaper for me to pay that price or actually change my behavior? Like, change the way that I pollute so that because that price is too high. It's cheaper for me to change my behavior than it is for me to pay the price. So there's all sorts of debates about the price of carbon. When Trump was in his first term, he was looking at the price of carbon just for the US. He said it was about $6 per ton. I think in the EU, they're trading closer at 90 or 100. I don't know, 80, 90, 100. Some people say it can be closer to like 250, 300. So the range of prices is huge, and the literature is just as kind of vast on that. We've taken kind of a middle of the road approach on the literature when we think about it, but what do you think is a reasonable price? 50 per ton, right? And that is the effect of, I think, the effect of that on, a tank of gas or a gallon of gas would be like, I think that's like, maybe 7 or 8 cents per gallon. So 250. I'm going to start with 50 and see what happens, and then we can talk about why 250 might be regressive or may have some kind of other effects. All right, so I'm going to put in 50. What do you think is going to happen? 2.9. Wow. Prize to the man in the middle of the room. All right. Okay. So what we see happening here is that is a significant drop compared to some of these other policies that we've seen. But what we're really seeing happening over here on the right is we're seeing that just the total demand for all energy sources is going down, right? So these policies that affect our behavior or change our behavior are very impactful, right? And so because we don't have a ton more time, what I want to do is I want to move us towards thinking about behavior change, and I'm just going to quickly set us up for something. In the middle, right, these are all the things that we do, right? We live in buildings, we turn on lights, we decide not to turn off lights, we drive cars, we drive them long distance, we use, gas-guzzling cars. I personally have a 2000 Jeep Wrangler, and it is a gas guzzler, and it is terrible, right? But this is what I do, and I haven't changed my behavior yet. This is what's happening here. The opposite of what John Sterman would do, which would be to tell you that he has 2 EVs and his house is totally efficient. I like to say I'm still on the pathway towards John Sterman. But we just saw how effective behavior change is, right? So think about the relationship between what is still happening over here on the left with oil and gas, and how we use those fuel sources, and how we might be able to enact policies that are going to change our use of it through our behavior. Say it louder, I can't hear you. Electrification, cars or buildings? So if you're electrifying a building, what is your fuel source? Coal. Or natural gas, or renewables, right? No, I'm only just level setting. So what you're basically doing is you're saying, I would like to electrify. You said buildings? Okay, buildings. I'm going to heavily electrify. Nothing happens. Why?
Because the
haven't changed.
energy is still from coal.
Right, yeah, you haven't changed anything over there. So we could do 2 things. We've already put a price on carbon, which means we've already disincentivized coal and it's kind of gone down. But we could do something a little bit more drastic, which is that we could just reduce building any new coal infrastructure, and we could completely retire all the coal. So that might have a little bit of effect. We could electrify transportation, but we were seeing the same thing because the fuel sources are the same. What about using the buildings?
I was going to ask, are you considering changes in the behavior of people?
Yes.
Instead of going to a shopping mall that is freezing in the summer, or is absolutely hot in winter, just be more, don't consume that much.
Energy efficiency, yes.
But it depends actually on people.
Yes.
Demanding those kinds of environments.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're talking about behavior change, and particularly how do we change our behavior as it relates to our use of buildings. So one of the things that we can do is we can say, let's just be more efficient in how we use our buildings. And AI is a really good answer for this because we've got all this kind of predictive technology in use in buildings that could actually help really improve the energy efficiency of buildings. And look what happens there. What we see is even though the temperature doesn't go down a ton, we're using far less of all of these fuel sources. And if you do the same thing with energy efficiency in cars, we see that happen again, right? So we're just using far less of all of the fuels so that you don't have to build as much, which also takes CO2. And so it has a whole bunch of effects. Just checking time. Okay, I've got about 10 minutes, right? Okay. Okay, so we're at 2.3, which is great. We're almost at 2, striving to 1.5. Other suggestions?
Isn't there a big effect on the carbon used for steel and construction, cement, concrete?
That's all in the energy efficiency of buildings and industry. If we bake that all into that, which is why it's so impactful. I mean, like steel, the question was what happens with steel and these other kinds of heavy, hard to abate industries, and yes, they're in that one. Yes, in the back.
I'm a great believer in technology, so I'd like to see what technological carbon dioxide removal do.
Okay, great. Do you know about some of these technologies? Okay. Okay, well, I won't have a ton of time to get into each of them, but I can just say that there's probably 6 major technologies out there right now that remove carbon from the atmosphere. There's a couple of things that happen. Some of them just suck carbon, these huge fans, and they just suck it and put it in the ground. You can also, that's direct air capture. You can also use rocks and crush up rocks, and that soaks up carbon, and there's a few others, but those are the ones that we model. So a couple of things to think about when you're building those technologies is that they're new nascent technologies, right? So they're just getting started, and also they take energy themselves. So when we think about, I'm going to give us a big boost because this is another politically palatable idea, and say what happens if we do that. And what happens is we see down here, we see a whole bunch of removals, right? So this is this is a graph of what are the actual removals. So we're seeing a ton of CO2 removals, gigatons per year. But we're not seeing, I don't know what just happened. Sorry, hold on. But we're not seeing the temperature go down as much as we expected. What do you think is going on? We went from 2.3 to 2.2. What do you think?
Do they produce heat?
They don't produce heat.
Well, you have a lot of emissions to build now.
There's a ton of emissions already there, and the built-out infrastructure. I mean, the amount of when we're talking about these technologies, which I'm not knocking the technology at all, but it's new. We're talking about millions of tons of CO2 when we have gigatons of CO2 that need to be removed. And we're also talking about a technology that is very expensive, so it's hard to scale. So even if you did have the best technology right now, there's only I think there's hundreds of these in the world, rather than the hundreds of thousands of these different technologies that need to be deployed. Depending on what the technology is, right? So it's about scale, it's about the price of the technology. So right now I think it's at about 600 tons or $600 per ton. And that's just nobody's gonna buy that right now. Especially if you only have a carbon price of $50, right? If you had a carbon price that was higher, maybe you would think about buying that. But that's part of the reason, is just these dynamics that are in play, yeah.
I'm curious about economic growth.
Okay.
Related to behavior and from a more systems perspective.
Yep.
Degrowth. Either, not that people will decide to degrow, but we might. I mean, we are degrowing in many industries right now.
Right. So, well, certainly, and there's an argument that tariffs are part of a degrowth strategy, right? Right. Buy less. Okay. So, implementing policies that would discourage economic growth, right? So, the intuition there is that if we use less, we're using less, we're losing less energy, right? So I'm going to cut the economy significantly to say, so we went from actually it didn't really do that much. Why is that? I'll have to think about that for a second. But so, yeah, I think it would also you'd also have to, even pulling down the population. You stumped me on that one, so let me just think about that for a second. It'll come to me in a minute. But what I do want to show you is that since we're here and we're talking about economics, is we started off by saying that we were expecting with no cost, with climate having no cost, we were expecting GDP to be this dotted line. This was our base case, this black line. Well, with the policies that we've implemented today, we've actually increased GDP while reducing temperature. And so I think this is one of these intuitions that people don't always understand, is that in this investment in these policies, we are reducing temperature, but we're also increasing GDP. So you can have both, right? Okay, so we're at 2.2. Do you have your hand up? No. Go ahead.
Okay, why don't we try a carbon price, was it 250?
You want to go up higher?
Higher.
Okay.
500.
All right, well, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show in a different screen what does a carbon price of 250 look like in absence of any of the other policies that we have, so we can just see the impact of it. Okay, so when we're at 3.3, well, you see, sorry, I don't know why this is, hold on, I'm going to do it over here. I don't know why these are 3.4. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. All right, so now we'll try that again. So 250. All right, so we go from 3.3 to 2.6. So that's what just if we did nothing else, right? So sure, like if you had one policy to take with you to a desert island, this is the one to take because it reduces as quickly as possible. With the other policies that we have in place, we're at 2.2. We'll just see what happens. I'm going to put it back to 50 because I think it's probably pretty unlikely. But if we did do that, because we already have so many other policies in place, by increasing even by $200, we're not affecting the temperature that much.
GDP go up more?
GDP did go up more. Which makes sense because you're reducing emissions even more, and you're replacing these with cheaper, so that means you have money to spend other places. I'm going to put it back to 50, though. Okay. Anything else that you all want to try, and then we can look and see. All we have to do is get to 2.0. I'm not going to make you get to 1.5. What's that? Population. Population is a really tough one. What is the policy that you would implement? More COVID. We do have COVID. Okay, so just because we only have 5 minutes, educating women and girls in developing countries, there are ways to think about population. If we were to, see population decline, we're not going to see that much difference. The reason is because people also take a long time to grow. Right? Okay, in the middle and the back there.
And reduce emissions from agriculture.
Agricultural emissions. So this is just making our agricultural systems more efficient. That does something. We could also do something with waste and leakage. I'm just going to move us along a little bit just to get us, so we're at 2.0. Great. Okay, woo! Now, what I want to do, though, is I want to just quickly bring us back to the conversation that we had at the beginning, which is this is less about emissions and temperature, but more about the way that this affects us. And let's just focus on heat, because that seemed to be something that was, very relevant here. So deaths from extreme heat, right? People who are dying because it's too hot have significantly declined in this scenario. So we're talking about saving, millions and millions of lives through these policies. We can also look at that, distributionally. So we can say where are the extreme heat days, and where could this, where is this affecting us? So these are the probable future maps that I mentioned. This is the scenario, the baseline scenario. Hang on. Baseline scenario in the U.S. of extreme heat days. Pink is hotter, blue is colder, and these are numbers of days that are more hot. In our scenario, we've just made it so much better, right? So we've made the number of extreme heat days go down in a lot of the country. Does that make sense? Are you seeing that? Yeah. We talked about extreme storms. So population exposed to hurricanes and typhoons. We've seen this go down pretty significantly. Millions of people are not going to be exposed to these storms. And more importantly, what we've seen that, like I said, we've grown GDP from the baseline. So we've actually created a more prosperous society for all. So I'm going to end it here, but just to say that I'm showing you something that can be used with government, but also this is a scenario testing tool that you can use in your own companies, right? If you're thinking about what is your biggest impact or what energy sources are you using the most, and where could you be thinking about your strategy for reducing your impact, you can use this to test your assumptions about what are the things you might want to invest in. Anything around carbon offsets, you can use this tool. And so what we do is we go in and we have these discussions. We have them with you, we have them with your colleagues, we show you how to use the model. And so that's available to all of you. And so I'll just leave you with, please stay engaged. Let us know what's going on in your countries, in your states, in your municipalities. Let us know how we can help, and thank you very much.